Welcome to the Platinum Freight Podcast with Peter McRae, a podcast for business owners sharing the latest news and tips about customs clearance and freight forwarding. Welcome to episode 9 of the Platinum Podcast with Peter McRae, Customs Broker. In this episode, we'll be discussing the topic of food truck trailers and food trailers. So, Peter, let's start with an overview. What are food truck trailers and how do they typically arrive in Australia, either as less than a container load LCL or full container load FCL?
Food truck trailers and food trailers, they will generally come into the country by sea freight, and some people, some importers, they'll just trial one food truck trailer. They'll see how it goes, and then they may or they may not bring in more. So some importers will bring it in via LCL, and then other importers will bring the food truck trailers in as FCL. Before these food trailers can depart from overseas, the importer will have to get a permit to bring these goods into the country. LCL shipping essentially means that the goods will be sharing space with other people's cargo as it travels to Australia. And FCL cargo means that anything and everything that is inside that container is one owner, one supplier, and that the importer owns everything within that container.
Now, before purchasing food truck trailers from overseas, what important factors should importers consider to ensure a smooth import process?
This is the beginning of the journey, and what I would say to any customer that contacts us when they want to import a food truck trailer is the hardest part is to find the supplier that they want to buy the goods from. So once they find that supplier overseas and they're about to place an order, that's the best time to liaise with our customs broker. And then if we were the customs broker, what we would be saying to the importer would be, great, you found that supplier. Now you need to go to apply for an import approval, and you need to apply for that import approval from the government department known as the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, and the Arts. But I'll be referring to them as infrastructure, and I'll be saying contact infrastructure in Canberra, apply for the import approval. That process, the infrastructure is going to be asking for photos of the food trailer. They're going to want to see the VIN plate, the vehicle identification number plate, and then you pay their fee, which is $50, and you need to wait 30 business days, which will equate to around 42 calendar days. Then once you have that import approval, then you can then advise the supplier overseas to ship the goods, and then your supplier overseas will place those goods in a shipping container. The goods will then travel to Australia, and during this process, if we were the customs broker, what we do with our existing clients is that we will start to collate this paperwork, and the overseas supplier will have such things as a commercial invoice, packing list, packing declaration, a bill of lading. The importer would have provided the import approval. We start to put these pieces together like a jigsaw. We pre-clear the goods before they arrive into the country. And amongst these issues, amongst these pieces of information that we are receiving, there are other issues that need to be addressed along the journey.
Now, can you explain the import approval process that needs to be followed before goods are shipped from overseas to Australia? And why is this approval necessary? And how long does it typically take?
Once you have found that overseas supplier, generally they won't manufacture the food trailer until they receive a deposit for the goods. And then the catch is it's going to take time to have the food trailer manufactured, but then it's also going to take 30 business days or 42 calendar days to receive the import approval. So some importers will take a risk, and what they will do is they will pay the deposit to start the manufacturing process of the food trailer. They will apply for the permit, but they won't ship the goods from overseas to Australia until they receive the import approval. So the import approval process, the importer has to apply, has to register at the infrastructure website, and they need to find the section which is called Rover. And Rover is the name of the portal, the name of the section on the website where the importer will start this process. There'll be a lot of boxes to fill in. Infrastructure will want to, as I said, see the photos of the food trailer. We'll want to see the VIN plate, and the overseas supplier will more than likely say we don't have the VIN plate until the food trailer is manufactured, but the overseas supplier will have to work with you and provide a projected VIN plate so that you can provide that to infrastructure. It's very important that the food trailer does not leave from overseas until the importer has that import approval in their email box. And then later on in this podcast, I'll be explaining why this is so important.
So, you've mentioned the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts, which we're going to refer to as infrastructure for short, and with them playing a key role in this process. So, what are the steps involved in obtaining import approval from this department? If you can expand on that in a little more detail.
The infrastructure department is a government department, so it's not a state department, it is a government department, and they have to authorize from their delegate that these goods can come to Australia and can then be towed on the road, even though they will be towed on the road at a state level. The government, the federal level, gives the approval. Then that approval allows the goods to come in to the Commonwealth, which is Australia, and that is at a federal level. So having the approval from the federal government level infrastructure then allows the Australian Border Force to allow the food trailer to come and enter the country. Then once the goods have entered the country, then the state road authority will be looking for the import approval that was given to allow this food trailer to come to the country.
Now, once the goods arrive in Australia, what are the options for collecting LCL cargo from the sea freight depot? And what is the process for delivering FCL cargo to the commercial address?
As I mentioned, there's two ways that these goods could be collected, delivered. So the first scenario would be where an importer has purchased a food trailer or a food truck and has maybe just imported one. So as you can imagine, these food trailers are not small, and they generally are packaged in a plywood crate. Does take up space. So what we would do is we would ask the overseas supplier to provide photos of what the goods look like packaged so that we can let the importer know that this is what you should be expecting to receive once the container has been unpacked and the goods need to be collected from the depot. So then LCL shipping, LCL cargo, in some respect is easier because the importer can go to the depot, or the importer could, for example, employ a tilt tray company or a tow truck company to go to the depot. The goods will be forklifted onto the vehicle, and then the goods can then be delivered to the importer's premise. So that is logistically easier. But then if we then talk about the FCL scenario, the whole shipping container, the whole full container load, which is just of one importer's goods, needs to be collected from the wharf once it comes off the vessel and then taken to the importer's premise. And then the whole FCL is placed onto the ground. The importer would then unpack the shipping container, and then we would then return in, say, 2 to 3 business days to de-hire to return that empty container to the wharf. So as you can see, the benefit of having one food trailer is it arrives, it's unpacked from the full container, and then somebody goes to the depot, collects the plywood crate, and then takes the goods away. Whereas the full container scenario, the importer is able to have, say, 2 food truck trailers in the container. So the cost effectiveness is better for a full container load scenario, but not every importer is at the stage where they are ready to import 2 food trailers to the country.
Now, what specific issues does the Australian Border Force or ABF focus on regarding food truck trailers, such as asbestos and related test reports and certificates?
As you can see, it is like a jigsaw, it is like a puzzle, and as a customs broker, that's how I see it as well. So we have this jigsaw on our desk. We have the importer who has provided us with a piece of information, which is the import approval. Then we then have the overseas supplier who provides us with a suite of documents, and there could be 8 documents in there that we need. Then we have 4 government departments involved with one food truck trailer coming to the country. So the first government department was infrastructure. They gave the import approval. Now we have to satisfy the Australian Border Force, and the Australian Border Force will be concerned with, are there any asbestos parts or components in the food truck trailer? And usually asbestos components can be found in brake lining pads and can also be found in insulation. So the ABF are focused on those issues. So the Australian Border Force can request certificates from your overseas supplier, and the overseas supplier should be able to provide asbestos testing certificates which show that the components used in the manufacture of your food trailer does not contain any asbestos components. So if the overseas supplier can provide those asbestos test certificates, then we have now ticked the second government department box.
Now, what are the key concerns of the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, or the DAF, when it comes to food truck trailers, including pre-used components, plumbing components, and wooden or timber components?
So far we've spoken about 2 government departments. Now we'll talk about the third government department, which I will refer to as agriculture. So agriculture are concerned with any timber or wooden components that are used in the food trailer. So for example, the flooring, if the benches are made from timber. In our previous experience, the food truck trailers are usually made from a metal floor and have stainless steel benches, so then it's not an issue. But we do need to satisfy agriculture with a declaration from the overseas supplier saying that the food truck trailer has not been pre-used, that it is a new food truck trailer. Then agriculture is then concerned about the plumbing components and to make sure that any components used in the plumbing are new. And then we then also need that declaration to stipulate if there are any timber or wooden components, if there is any plywood used in the food truck trailer. Plywood is not an issue, but it does need to be stated on the declaration to satisfy agriculture.
Now, how does the Department of Climate Change, Energy and Environment and Water, or the DCEEW, regulate items like air conditioners, fridges, and freezers in imported food truck trailers?
So now this is our fourth government department that is concerned with food truck trailers coming to the country. As you can see, it's an extremely long name, so I'm going to refer to it as the Environment Department. Let's just use that name. They're concerned with issues like ozone depleting gases. So ODGs, they're going to be concerned with what refrigerant gas has been used to charge the air conditioner, what ODG has been used for the fridge, or what ODG has been used for the freezer. So as you can see, these jigsaw has many parts to it, and we need to make sure that all these pieces of the puzzle come together. And I guess that's one reason why it's very important that the customs broker is involved at the earliest stage so that all these issues can be addressed weeks, maybe even months before the goods are even shipped to Australia. Because in the next section, when we provide some case studies, you'll understand how these issues compound. And when there are issues in our world, in the customs clearance, in the importing world, issues mean cost, costs mean expense, and it's an easy way for a project to blow out.
Now, can you share some of those real world examples or case studies, as you've mentioned, with customers who've had no issues and other cases where storage and detention problems did arise, just to illustrate the potential and challenges as well as the solutions?
I have two case studies, and obviously it would be easy for me just to talk about the success stories, but it's important to give two sides of the story. So the first case study is we have a repeat customer who regularly imports food truck trailers, and it is no hassle, no drama, no issue, and we do liaise with their overseas supplier. We receive all of the paperwork before the goods depart. They apply for the infrastructure permit. They provide the permit to us. We put it as part of their puzzle, and then we ask the overseas supplier to address the ABF plus the agriculture plus the environmental regulations. This importer, if I remember correctly, has now had 4 shipments of food truck trailers, and it's going well for them. So that's the positive success story. But, and as I say, there's always a but, there's always the horror stories. And sometimes the horror stories are the more interesting because they actually help you learn from other people's mistakes. And this scenario, this case study, an importer contacted us. They wanted to import a food trailer. We advised them they need to go and apply for the infrastructure permit. We had given them our quote. Then we never heard anything back from the importer. And then the importer contacted us as the shipment arrived, if I remember correctly. And they said, our shipment is here. And I said to the importer, do you have the approval? We haven't heard from you for, say, a month. And then they said, we haven't applied for the permit, or we have applied for the permit, but it's only been recently. So then just imagine the vessel has arrived, the container is here, and I've already mentioned that it takes 30 business days or 42 calendar days to receive this permit. And they're advising us that they don't have the permit. So straight away, I know and I advise them that you have 2 issues. One, the wharf is charging you storage per calendar day, which let's say is a minimum of $400 a day. 2, the shipping line who owns that shipping container is unable to use that shipping container. Therefore, they will start to charge you rent or detention on that shipping container, let's say 7 days after the vessel arrived into the country. So I advise the importer, you have 2 clocks ticking. You have storage at the wharf and you will soon have rent. And you don't have this permit, and we don't have any paperwork to start the process on this shipment. So the importer, as I mentioned, applied for the permit, and I asked the importer every day, please contact infrastructure and ask them how far away the import approval process is from being approved. And it did take close to that 30 business days to receive that permit. So we, in the meantime, had moved the container, the full container, from the wharf to a depot, an Australian Border Force approved depot where it remains under customs control until this permit arrived. And regrettably, we had to charge the importer a storage fee because we didn't do anything wrong. We had advised the importer prior, you need this permit, don't ship the goods until you have this permit. The importer shipped the goods. The importer didn't communicate with us until the container arrived. So the importer had to pay storage at the wharf, storage at the approved Australian Border Force depot, and then they would have received a rent / detention invoice from the shipping line once that empty container was returned to the wharf, once the container was able to be unpacked. So that horror story, that non-positive story, shows that if you don't do this properly and correctly, you have all these unnecessary fees that didn't need to be incurred, but were incurred because the flow wasn't followed. So in business, every cent counts, and there were thousands of dollars just unnecessarily paid because this process wasn't followed. The the last issue that I just wanted to talk about just briefly, because it's so important, is that whenever you have high value goods traveling by sea to Australia, you need to make sure that your goods are insured while they're moving from your supplier's premise through to your premise. So insurance just seems to be a topic that some people just isn't at the front of their mind. And if it's not at the front of the mind, then it does get forgotten. But if you Google, if you research shipping containers falling off boats, you'll see that shipping containers do fall off boats. And while we've never had a customer who has had a shipping container fall off a boat, and I guess that's just pure luck, there are importers who have had their cargo fall off the vessel, and then the goods wash up to the shore. And if that importer did not have insurance on their goods, then there's no compensation to be received.
Thanks for sharing your insights and tips, Peter. Now, to learn more about customs clearance and freight management services, visit platinumfreight.com.au.